So we're going to hop right in, and we thought that we would start this morning by mapping juvenile sex trafficking in Minnesota. What does it look like across our state? And then the opportunity to engage with those organizations that are here throughout the day and the breakout sessions and topics and speakers to take you a little bit deeper on the individual issues, and then also give you some opportunities to take your next steps. You will be able to map your own step in the movement to protect our Minnesota kids by the end of today. So let's hop right in. So to introduce us to juvenile sex trafficking in Minnesota, I want to tell you the story of this door. And this is an actual door. This isn't Google. This is a photo that I took while conducting a search warrant in a Minnesota juvenile sex trafficking case. And I first learned about this door when I got a phone call as an officer in Minneapolis from the Carver County Sheriff's Department that said, we found one of our missing juveniles. She was unconscious in a hotel lobby along the 494 strip. She's in the hospital. We think this is human trafficking, a little out of our realm at the moment, and so would you come and help us out? So my partner and I went to the hospital where we met with a wonderful, brave, amazing, recovering, phenomenal 17-year-old teenage girl from Carver County. And she began to tell us about where she had been for the last 8 days in her sex trafficking ordeal. And she told us about how it started, which was meeting another teenager and just talking about teenage things together, another girl her age, talking about life, talking about the troubles of teenage life, and talking about the excitement. They decided to go on an adventure of running away just for the night. And her new friends said, well, I have somebody that can pick us up. I have a place where we can stay. We won't be out on the street. And that sounded even better, and off they went. Well, what the 17-year-old girl from Carver County didn't know is that her new friend was a victim of sex trafficking and had been getting trafficked since her 14th birthday. And the person where they were going to stay was her trafficker's house. And that began an 8-day ordeal for her, being trafficked across 3 different counties in the state of Minnesota. And also an introduction to a second trafficker that lived in a beautiful apartment building in Burnsville, Minnesota. She told us about the door. Of all her memories, some were cloudy, some were gone. Trauma does what it does. But some of her memories were incredibly clear and etched forever. And one of those memories was of this door. And she said, I'd get brought to the door. And the man behind the door had a slave room where us kids would go. And so with the information, we launched an investigation, and the first thing that we found was the other 17-year-old girl. And the 17-year-old girl said, I know exactly where that door is. I've been getting dropped off there for the last 3.5 years. So she said, I'll take you there right now. So me and my partner and her, we drove around to a residential block in a beautiful neighborhood in the middle of a summer day where children were out playing in the yard, riding their bikes, single-family homes. And in the middle of that block, she pointed to a house and said, that's the house that has the door. And there's no need to exaggerate or emotionalize this. It's traumatic in and of itself. So I don't make this up when I say she pointed to a single-family home on a residential block where children were playing ball, where moms and dads were mowing the grass, and the house was beautiful, well-manicured, perfectly white with a white picket fence around the front. So are you sure this is the place with the door? And she said, oh, I'm sure. I've been coming here for years. So brought her home, got a search warrant signed by a judge, and we went back to the house that she selected and conducted our search warrant, at which time we found that there were 4 men between the ages of 35 and 54 that lived in that house. They all had full-time professional jobs, working collar, working class type guys. And as I'm conducting the search warrant, I see this white door in the kitchen. And it's got a reinforced frame, it's got double locks on it, and I'm thinking it's the back door to the house until I look over and I see a much less reinforced door, which is the back door of the house. So I go, what the heck is this? And I knew at the time that I had found the door that the kids were talking about. Inside the door, it used to be a pantry that was now converted into what the kids described as the sex slave room. You can see that there's a dirty pallet on the floor. There's a big pile of kids' stuff in the corner. There's games, there's DVDs, there's candy wrappers, old McDonald's French fries that had probably been there for months laying on the floor. And on the wall, there were rules written in both English and Spanish that started with, attention, all who enter here will follow these rules. What juvenile sex trafficking is not. Sometimes to learn something, we have to kind of get rid of what we might already think. So let's push this out of the way real quick. Juvenile sex trafficking is not only a global, distant issue happening somewhere else but my neighborhood or my community or my school or near my church. It is not prostitution. It is not a mutual agreement made between a child and an adult to exchange sex favors for money, and it's a mutual agreement. It is not that. It is not always kidnapping. Approximately 10% of juvenile sex trafficking starts with a kidnapping situation. We'll learn how the other 90% start in a minute. And it is not only a crime against women and girls, although we best know at the time, right now, the data we know is most girls and women and girls are most likely, but it is not a crime that is only affecting women and girls. It's affecting all genders. And 36% of trafficked minors in the United States are biological boys. And that was a study that was commissioned by the Department of Justice. So what it is. Now we have a criminal definition, both state level and a federal level, but what the definition is, what sex trafficking of a juvenile is to exploit a person under the age of 18 by facilitating the exchange of something of value for a sex act. So anybody that does anything to facilitate that exchange with a person under the age of 18 can be guilty of felony sex trafficking at the federal level or at our state level here in Minnesota. Something of value can be money, but it can also be a place to stay. It can be shelter. It can be clothes. It can be food. It can be diapers and formula if you're a young dad or you're a young mom. It can be life-saving medications that you need, like asthma medications or diabetic medications. Something of value is exchanged for a sex act, which could be sex, but it could be sexual photos, sexual videos. It could be strip dancing, erotic massage. Anything that is a sex act. Mapping it across the United States, these are phone calls that come into the National Human Trafficking Hotline every year, that come into the hotline about reports of trafficking. And we get reports of trafficking every year since the hotline started. About 2 years into the hotline, they started getting flooded with calls from all 50 states of the United States. Let's bring it into Minnesota and map Minnesota a little bit. In 2016, our judicial courts issued 2 statements. One statement was, we now have cases of trafficking in our courts of every county of Minnesota. And the second statement that they issued was, Minnesota ranks the 3rd highest in rates of child sexual crimes in our nation. So in our nation, we are the 3rd highest state of sex crimes against children. There's about 12,000 people that are trafficked in our state every day. So today, while we are here, 12,000 people will have been trafficked while we're here today. The 200 minors that are placed in ads, that actually goes all the way back to 2010, where they first did a study and found that there was 210 ads showing a juvenile that was available for sex on the internet in Minnesota. And then, as cases started to rise, I think it was the Washington County Prosecutor's Office started to take a deeper dive into it and found that that number triples on holidays like St. Patrick's Day. Those holidays and those days in our state that are the big party day, the big alcohol day, the big entertainment day, the number tripled. Of those 12,000, there's over 5,000 youth or people under the age of 18 that are trafficked in our state. This was a student survey in 2019 by the Minnesota Department of Health, and for the first time they had added a question that met the criminal definition of juvenile sex trafficking. This survey is given to students that are in high school, in school, every 3 years, and in 2019 that question was added, and it found that over 5,000 students sitting in our Minnesota high schools. Okay, so that dispels a couple myths probably a little bit right now too, that they're just gone and they're disappeared and there's nothing you can do. Over 5,000 are sitting in our classrooms, in our church youth groups, that have been a victim of at least one form of juvenile sex trafficking. The study also found, if we map the results, that those students are from every region of Minnesota, so it didn't matter if you were up north in the woodlands, or if you were on the range or the reservation, or you were down south in our farm area, and everywhere in between. And it also found that the rates between boys and girls was the same. There was no statistically significant difference between rates of girls and rates of boys that were reporting being a victim of sex trafficking in our state. So this picture and pictures like this are often used, but if this is the only picture we have in our mind of sex trafficking, we're missing the fact that these students are sitting in front of us every day. They're at the coffee shop, they're at the restaurant, they're at the library, they're sitting in class, they're sitting in church, they're still showing up to sports, at least for a while. Sometimes not for long, but at least for a while. We still have opportunity to do something, to see something, and to do something. This may be more the picture we need to keep in our mind. What are those behavior changes? What are those mental health concerns? What are those physical concerns that we might see with students? So what sex trafficking can look like in our state and does look like in our state, every story is different. But there are some common stories that we see. One is teens and college students that are getting involved in what's called sugaring, which is posting themselves for sale to go on a date for money. This is an absolutely tremendous increasing trend right now among high school students and college students, called sugaring, which makes it sound very pretty. And they're actually posting themselves. And we'll talk more about the online exploitation crimes that we see off the charts as we're working with students across our state. In a breakout session later, I'll be doing the online issues later, one of the breakouts among several others. But sugaring, it starts as that idea and quickly turns into sexual assault and rape and sex trafficking. Youth who are being forced to trade sex for money, their housing, their food. Teen parents being solicited for sex acts in exchange for the diapers and the formula and being able to care for their kids. Family members that traffic their own children, including biological parents. About a third of trafficked minors are trafficked within their own families or by their own family members. And then that new relationship, or at least at first it seems like a relationship, that then turns into abuse and control and isolation, and then the introduction to exploitation, and then violence and abuse to keep the silence. And Eliana, who's your next speaker, will talk more about that dynamic. But that last story that we see is kind of one of the most common ones that people are aware of, where we have that third person that becomes the controlling, abusive, or trafficker. So youth, Who's getting impacted by this? The first and most important thing to understand is that it's youth of all ages, all genders, all ethnicities, cultures, socioeconomic status, every community across Minnesota. Does every community have some epidemic of sex trafficking? Absolutely not. But it's important to know you're not exempt, that we see this in every community. But there are some common vulnerabilities, and this is what's so important to know and take with you throughout today. As you're learning more and hearing from speakers and going to your breakout sessions and going into the vendor hall to meet with organizations, these are the risk factors, common risk factors and vulnerabilities that we see. So if we know what makes a youth vulnerable, if we know what a risk factor is, that makes you and I the potential solution to reduce those vulnerabilities. How do we invest in kids first? How do we close those gaps in what they need? How do we mentor? How do we engage with our youth so that that vulnerability and that risk factor doesn't exist? Because that is what traffickers will use and pick up on to start building that relationship leading to exploitation. So if we do it first, we leave nothing left for a predator or a trafficker to fill. Housing instability and homelessness. Invest in, support, volunteer at your youth homeless shelters or your homeless shelters. Youth that have a history of sexual abuse or early childhood sexual trauma, but especially when they don't get access to resources and counseling and therapy that help to rebuild and strengthen those sexual and body boundaries. Involvement in the criminal justice or foster care systems are at incredible risk of trafficking. We have an organization here today called Foster One who will be leading a breakout session. They're also in the vendor hall, and they help support foster kids and foster families in our state. Connect with them. Emotional poverty, depression, isolation, anxiety, not feeling worthy, not feeling accepted, being disconnected. That can become a vulnerability or a risk factor. So invest in our youth, mentorship, how we lead our programs, the engagement we have at school and church, all make a difference. Individuals or whole communities that are marginalized and isolated. Don't let anybody be out there by themselves. Be a friend. That's what we tell youth all the time. Be a friend. Be the one. It just takes one person to be that friend and fill that gap. Undocumented families and communities. Predators know that they're afraid to call police and that they won't. They know this. Sitting in a Chaska high school doing our program, and we had a teenager that had been put in child pornography since she was 12 years old come forward and talk to us, and she currently had a 10-year-old cousin that was being sex trafficked, and the whole entire family kept their mouth shut because so many family members were undocumented. The fear of deportation. So how we reach our communities, how we support them. You know, if immigration, it doesn't matter what your view is on that. What matters is what's your view on kids, right? What's your view on kids? So let's just go there. And no prevention, education, or early interventions. That rises to the top. We have two other people that are involved in order for sex trafficking to happen in our state. A trafficker is sometimes involved in the buyer. So who the heck is the buyer? Mapping the buyer. So this was a study in 2017 funded by the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, and they did a very extensive study on juvenile sex trafficking in Minnesota, and then they took a look at the buyers that were arrested for showing up to buy sex with a kid. And what they found is that they were from all these rural and suburban and urban communities, found that they were willing to drive 30 to 60 miles just to buy sex with somebody or sex with a kid because they wanted to be anonymous and not do it in their own community. It found that on average, although there were, it went way across the board, on average, it was a middle-aged, white, male, professional, married with children, and often with children the same age as the ones that he was driving to buy sex with, which is sexual assault. Okay, look at these 4 pictures. So we know it takes 3 people for juvenile sex trafficking to happen in our state: a trafficker, a buyer, a young person. Thinking about who's who for a second. And the answer is this: all 4 of these people are convicted sex traffickers in the state of Minnesota. All 4 of them have been convicted of sex trafficking. The teenage girl, she noticed that there was an isolated, marginalized girl at school with no friends, who always ate lunch alone, was part of special ed services, and nobody would sit with her at lunch. So this girl had a bright idea that she was going to become her friend, sit with her at lunch, start asking her to hang out after school. And then what her new friend didn't know is when she got invited to the party and thought that was the best thing that's ever happened in my high school career, what she didn't know is that this teenager had already arranged payment for boys at that party to sexually assault her. The older gentleman with the mustache transported women across the Twin Cities that had been brought here and their documents taken away, their documents stripped, young women that were from Southeast Asia that came to the United States, and they were trafficked, and he was the driver. The older woman with the glasses down there, she is a grandmother from Watertown in Carver County, rural Minnesota, and she was arrested for trafficking her 8-year-old granddaughter to a registered sex offender in Iowa. And the younger man with the tattoo on his neck, he is from Chicago, and he had another young lady in the car, and they knew exactly where to go in the community where young people would hang out, and he knew exactly what he'd be looking for when he got there, and he saw a 15-year-old girl that he made contact with and struck up a conversation. No gun, no white van, no force, no violence, just simply said, "You look like you could use a family." And she could. To be honest, she could. So she got in the car, and the big adventure began to drive to Minneapolis. And once she got here and had no idea where she was, and her phone was taken away, and she got put into a hotel and realized that this was a trafficking situation, she said no, and that was met with severe violence, and they thought they had left her for dead, but she was found walking along I-94 at 7 o'clock in the morning and brought to the hospital. So you see, these are all 4 totally different scenarios, but the foundation of these scenarios was relationship of one form or another, or at least that's how it started. So traffickers can be any gender, any age, can be family members, can be cults, can be occult, can be gang members, peers the same age. And what they do, less than 10% is kidnapping, about 90% is building that intentional, grooming, manipulative relationship by identifying need, meeting need, and then once the relationship is built, isolation, control, abuse can start, the introduction to exploitation, and then some pretty extreme levels of violence. And with the kids and the youth that we see that either get found or disclosed or come forward or get help, these are the crimes that have been committed against them, and these are the injuries that we consistently see. So what's the good news? Okay? So that we can get our, feel better for, I don't know. Like, what's the good news, right? I don't like saying, here's some information, and now what are you going to do about it? Go home and figure that out. That's just not me. Every year, every conference, every time I open my face, it's now what do we do with that, right? How do we turn that awareness into actionable steps? And one of the biggest things, obviously being a youth prevention organization is going to be, and this is what youth say, this is what survivors have said, this is what the experts and frontline workers are saying, prevention education. When we are doing our program in the schools, we have prevention stories coming forward. And these kids are not only making different decisions about themselves and their relationships, they're helping be advocates and a voice to their generation and to others and to their friends and even to their siblings. Kids are coming forward to get help to put a stop to harm that's already happening. And we don't end anything by responding to it after it's happened. We end stuff by taking what we know now and getting ahead of it in prevention. So our particular programs that we do at ACT United is we have Youth Aware, which we've been doing in schools and churches, about 36 now, middle schools, since 2016. And online safety we have for all ages, where we do safety camps, and we do elementary school and down to kindergarten. We have a student ambassador program, which is our learner to leader program, where kids and students have an opportunity to become an ambassador, to get training on the issues and learn what their skills are and skill development, and then put those skills to use with real projects that they get to do for their school, church, or community. And then we have campus groups on college campuses. Oh, I forgot I had these in there. Those are fun. Those are just different projects. Oh, and there's class. There's online safety class. And it must be on auto roll, because I'm not doing that. Or I'd let you stay a little longer and look at all those faces, because I just love those kids. So besides us, you have action steps you can take today. If you're a pastor, if you're a mom, if you're a grandma, if you're a grandpa, an uncle, if you're in business, if you work at a library, you work in the schools, you go to church, right? If you have youth anywhere in your life or in your neighborhood, there will be steps that you can take today. Of these organizations that are over there, there's 2 that are working in prevention education in the schools. It's us and CAST Minnesota. They're going to be in that room too. Youth leadership and mentorship programs. How do we help? Youth are the front lines of this, you guys. Like, by the time we know about it, it's too late, right? They're the front lines. They're the ones that are targeted. They need the information, the education, and the resources in their back pocket. So prevention education and leadership programs. Survivor services are back there. Help support restorative and survivor and housing services. You'll have Eliana's organization will be in that room. Others that are working in advocacy and support for survivors. Equipping churches to be a safe place of Christ-centered advocacy, but with the knowledge and the training and the awareness of what is helpful help and what's not so helpful help. I call it harmful help, right? So what is helpful help? How do we create a safe place for healing and support in our faith communities? There's the Child Protection League is in there. They are in the realm of legislation and laws and policies. How do we make Minnesota a safe place for kids? And there's a couple legislative initiatives right now in the House that need your support, so please connect with them and learn about that. One of our breakout speakers is going to be Deborah Lund from the Scott County Prosecutor's Office. She's the head of the criminal division. She's going to be talking about sex offender law, registration, and release. How do they get out? Why do they get out? And what are the registration levels? The Child Protection League Action is currently working on legislation because they have realized that there is a gap in that law that is putting Minnesota kids at risk. So learn the law and then connect with them in the vendor hall on what you can do to be a part of supporting the positive change for that to protect Minnesota kids. Social Impact Business Stories Foundation, so many different ways to take action or invest today. So please stay connected to us after today and all the organizations that you will meet in the vendor hall. So I will end on I talk really fast. I also do part-time auctioneering. And I go through a lot of water, so invest in Culligan. But we're so glad you're here today. Thanks for letting me talk really fast to just map Minnesota and what we're looking at today.